Let me start with a question. Are you conscious? Now you could reply, give me 15 minutes and I'll be sleeping. And that might be fair. But are you conscious? It's normally, I guess, that consciousness is considered a good thing and to be unconscious is a bad thing. So if you walked in this morning and you said to me, I've had a mate who's been in a car accident, he's unconscious, I would take that as a bad sign. But if you were to say, he's been in an accident, but he is now conscious, I'd take that as a good sign. Normally, unconsciousness bad, consciousness good. However, it's not always that straightforward. If you met somebody at the school gate tomorrow and they said to you, I was so drunk on Friday night, I passed out, the chances are they're seeing that level of unconsciousness as the sign of a good night out. And it's also fair that some of us try and protect ourselves in life from a certain level or with a certain level of unconsciousness. I want to be sensitive, but for some of us who have abuse in our past, one of the ways that we try and protect ourselves is to put it to the back of our heads. What are we doing there? We're craving a certain level of unconsciousness because our abuse stalks us when we are conscious. And for some of us, that's the trap door through which we fell into our addictions. The hit or the high offered a certain level of escape, a level of safe unconsciousness. And often our reasoning is, it's better to be unconscious than to be conscious of this or that or them. Do you get what I'm saying? So sometimes the question isn't, are you conscious? The better question is to ask, do you want to be conscious? Because sometimes the answer is no. Now, in this bit of the Bible that Paul is writing, he is speaking to people who are spiritually unconscious in the churches of Rome. And he wants the words of this letter to be like CPR for their spiritual unconsciousness. He is pounding their chest with his words, trying to wake them up, trying to resuscitate them, to regain a level of consciousness. Now, he's spoken to two different types of people, trying to perform CPR on them both. So first we saw him speaking to a group of people called Gentiles. People who'd been willfully chasing unconsciousness from God. The language he used was, they are suppressing the truth. Then he's turned to another group of people who were called the Jews. And they were trying to be willfully unconscious of their sin. And they were doing that by presuming on their privilege and by making judgments about other people. And Paul's been going between both groups, trying to perform CPR on them both to wake them up from their spiritual and willful unconsciousness. You unconscious of God, you unconscious of your sin, you both need to wake up. Because Paul considers their unconsciousness unimaginably dangerous. He's desperate to bring them back round. He is labouring for them, sweating over them, not giving up on them, because he wants them to come round to what he knows. Now that means that today, like the last few weeks, is probably going to feel pretty heavy. It's going to be hard because by nature, we don't want to know what Paul wants us to know. Just like we don't want to relive our abuse, and like an addict doesn't want to face reality, there is something in us that does not want to be woken up to who God is and who we are. Sometimes we crave the safety of unconsciousness. That's why we hate silence. That's why we endlessly scroll. But even if today feels heavy, we need to cling again to the truth that Paul says this is good news. You need to be conscious of your condition before God before you can see your need of the cure that comes from God. And so today, what I want to try and show you from Romans chapter 3 is that Paul wants you conscious of two things. And he's going to imagine them as two things that you are under. All right? So we're going to see two things that Paul says we are under. Here's the first one. And these are from verses, 9 down to verse 18. First thing, Paul wants you conscious that you are under sin. So listen along from verse 9 of chapter 3. Paul says, what shall we conclude then? So he's at the end of his argument. He says, do we, speaking about his fellow Jews, do we have any advantage? Now, if you were here last week, that should ring a bell. Because he asked exactly the same question last week. Romans chapter 3, verse 1, he said, do we, the Jews, have any advantage? And if you look back, what was his answer? He said, yes, in every way. The Jews had a privilege before God. Do we have advantage? Yes. But listen to what he answers the same question with this week. Chapter 3, verse 9. Do we have any advantage? Last week he said, yes, in every way. What does he say this week? No. Not at all. For we have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under sin. Do Jews have an advantage? Last week, yes, in every way. This week, no, not at all. And you're going, Paul, give us a break. That makes no sense. Here's what he's saying. Did the Jews have the advantage of privilege before God? Yes, much in every way. But does that privilege mean that the Jews have favoritism that would mean they'd escape the judgment of God? No. Not at all. He says Jews and Gentiles have the same charge sheet. And it's this. All alike under the power of sin. This is what Paul wants us conscious with. Your life, like their life, and like my life, has been lived under sin. It's a horrible image, but the image is of a slave driver, a brutal bully, a oppressive tyrant who has you round the neck with his chain, his power over you. You under sin, sin over you. Now this is so important. See, if you're just getting into what the Bible's about, learning why Jesus is so important, you need to get this. Our problem with God isn't just some things that I've occasionally done wrong in my life. My problem is that my whole life has been lived under sin. And you may be dangerously unconscious of this. That the life that your family has passed down to you or our community has taught you is a life that is under sin. And you might not be conscious of it because it's all you've ever known. But we are slaves. And sin has its power over us. And because we're chained to it and it has power over us, we live under its darkness. And you might be here this morning sat there going, Kimmel, I've lived for years and years and years, and I've not been able to explain why, but there has been this heavy darkness over me. And nothing I've tried has been able to help me escape. We heard our wifey give her testimony this weekend, and she said before she got saved, it was like she had no feeling. What explains that? This. That your whole life is lived under the power of sin. It's not just a few evidences of me breaking God's law. It is that the entirety of my life has been lived under the oppressive rule of sin. Now, here's where I can be a kind of squirmy little rascal and try and say, well, if I'm under the power of sin, I'm just a victim here. But Paul doesn't let you play that card. He says we are not just victims to the cruel tyrant of sin, we are co-conspirators with sin. Have a look at verse 10. Right, Paul's going to quote 7 bits from the Bible to show that we are not just unwilling victims, we are willing co-conspirators. Have a look at verse 10. As it's written, there's no one righteous, not even one. There's no one who understands. There's no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Now, he's not saying that we're all as bad as we could be, but he is saying that none of us are as good as we should be. We love to excuse ourselves and other people. Oh, I'm not that bad. Or even a person who's lived a pretty bad life, at their funerals will excuse them and say, I had a good heart. The Bible says we are all alike under sin. We've willfully chosen to be unconscious of God. The idea is we have become godless. And when you become godless, look at verses 13 and 14. When you become godless, you become sinful. Look at verse 13. What does that lead to? Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. That's us, isn't it? Just listen when you walk about the scheme. Just look at social media. That's that, isn't it? When I empty myself of God, my mouth reveals what I become full of. Death and deceit. And that godlessness and sinfulness then overflows into harmfulness. We're godless, we become sinful, and we become harmful. Look at verse, where are we? Verse 15. Their feet are swift to shed blood, ruin and misery mark their ways, the way of peace they don't know, and there's no fear of God before their eyes. Why are places like Gracemount, Gilmerton and Birdie House, but also places like Morningside, The Grange and Corstorphine, filled with violence, ruin, misery and a lack of peace? Because everyone in all of these places lives under the rule of sin. And our relationship with God impacts not just who we are, but how we treat one another. If we become godless, we become sinful, and we act in harmful ways to other people. And as Paul performs this kind of written CPR, he's calling out to you going, are you conscious of this? Are you conscious that you've lived your life under sin? Are you conscious that you have turned away from God? Are you conscious that sin seems to flow really easy out of you? It's not a nice thought to think, but are you conscious of the negative impact that your sin has had on other people? Particularly to those closest to you. Those that you love the most. Now, we don't want to be conscious of this. I don't want to wake up to this. I don't want to admit this about myself. But Paul's diagnosis, God's diagnosis, is bang on the money. I don't just do some sin. I am sin. I love sin. I'm under sin. Right? That's the first thing. He wants you conscious of this. All right? We live our lives under sin. Now, here's the second one. We're not just under sin, but Paul wants us conscious that we are under God's law. Now, we'll read this bit in a moment, but we need to remember Paul's writing this letter, and included in the people who are receiving it are people called the Jews. Now, the Jews, as he tries to perform CPR on them, are people that presumed, even if I'm under sin, they presumed that because they had God's law, that was the thing that could lift them up out of their sin. So they'd be going, well, sure, I might be told that I'm under sin and I'm down, but the law is the ladder that will lift me up. And yeah, you might say that I'm under sin and so I'm sick, but the law is the medicine that will make me better. Or they might say, yeah, the law, yes, sin means that I am guilty and charged by God, but the law will be my acquittal. That was their mindset. I might be under sin, but the law will lift me up. But listen to what Paul says in verse 19. Now we know, whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced, the whole world held accountable to God. You could understand that as come under the judgment of God. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of our sin. We're not just under sin, but we are under the law. The Jews had it all wrong. It's not that sin is the kind of slave driver and the law is the freedom giver, but it's that the law shows us that we are sinners. The law is not a ladder out, it is what keeps us locked down. The law is not a medicine that makes me better, it's just a COVID test that shows me I've been infected with a virus. The law is not your way to freedom in a courtroom, it is the thing that condemns you in the courtroom. We sung it at the start. The law could never save us. You could use that idea of singing. The law doesn't make you sing of freedom. The law simply makes you silent in fear. You see that in verse 19? So that every mouth may be silenced. One day you will stand before God. But as someone who's lived under the law, you will have no excuses for breaking God's law. On that day, you won't be able to say, but God will simply say, shh. Everything you've done in a life lived under sin has been done under the law. Which means that every act against God is still accountable to God. You've worshipped things other than God. You've worshipped gods in ways forbidden by God. You've dishonoured the name of God. You've defiled what God has called holy. You've disobeyed your parents. You've hated other people, lusted other people, stolen from other people, lied to other people, and been envious of other people. The law doesn't save you. The law simply says that you are sinful. And even if you've tried to be God less in your thoughts, your sinfulness and harmfulness still leaves you accountable to God. You can't say, well, because I was unconscious of God, I am unaccountable to Him. And just because you've done some nice religious things doesn't mean that we will be excused of our nasty, irreligious things. If you look at verse 20, Paul sums it up, both positively and negatively. The law will never make us righteous. The law simply makes us conscious. So let me ask you again, are you conscious of this? Are you conscious that everything you've ever done has been done under God's jurisdiction? That He is conscious of everything? That one day you will stand accountable to Him with no excuses before God for all the times that you have broken the law of God? This is where we're left. Confined under sin and condemned under the law. There's a very famous Christian book that helps us picture this by saying living under sin is like having a massive burden on your back that you cannot carry. And life under the law is like having to try and carry that massive burden up a hill that you could never climb. Under sin, a burden. Under the law, an unscalable mountain. Now, you're probably sat there going, this is why I don't want to be conscious of this stuff. This is why people suppress this stuff. Because I'm just depressed by this stuff. Why would anyone want to be resuscitated just to be reprimanded? You wouldn't want to wake up to be told this, would you? And many people just go, you know what? Just give me a spiritual DNR. Just write across my notes, do not resuscitate. But let's repeat what we said near the start. The reason Paul wants us conscious of our condition before God is because there is a cure from God. But you need to know your need. And you need to know your need now. Because a life lived under sin and a life lived under judgment is not unending. One day we will die, and after death we will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Sarah's dad is currently in a 4-bed cardiology ward in the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. In that 4-bed ward, last Thursday morning, one of the men filling the other 4 beds was due to have an operation on one of his valves. It was scheduled for Thursday morning. 4 a.m. Thursday, his heart monitor went off. A nurse ran from the nurse's station, realised that he was under cardiac arrest, hits the emergency button. 12 other medics run into the room, and for 45 minutes they tried to bring him back to consciousness. But after 45 minutes, they pronounced him dead. His operation was scheduled for later that morning. And if they could get him conscious, there was a procedure that would have changed his future. This bit of Romans is like those 45 minutes of CPR. If Paul can get us spiritually conscious, there is something that can change our future. But unconsciousness is unimaginably dangerous. And if we remain suppressing the truth, our condition will remain unchanged. There is a procedure that can change your future. We've seen it already in Romans. There is a Spirit, the Holy Spirit, who comes like a surgeon to perform heart surgery on people like you and me. And that's why Paul wants to wake you up. Jesus is nowhere in these verses. I don't know if you noticed that. But this is the end of the bad news. Verse 20 are the last words of the bad news. And if you look to verse 21, you'll see that the first word of verse 21 is the beginning of the good news. But, Paul says in verse 21. I'm not going to steal the thunder for next week. But if you come back next week, you will find that in Jesus there is one who comes to bear your burden and inhabit your life under sin so that he can powerfully free you from sin. And we'll see that in Jesus is one who came and in bearing your burden walks up a mountain and dies for the curse of your law breaking so that you can be declared righteous in God's sight. And if you're conscious of this, you can be changed by Christ. But if you remain unconscious, continue to suppress the truth, your condition will remain forever changed. If you die under sin, with no fear of God, but under the law of God, accountable to God, you will forever suffer under the wrath of God. Hell. But if this morning you've become conscious of the charge that stands against you, Paul is going to show there is joy in justification. And he would invite you and say, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. If you know that need, I plead with you, do it now. The guy in the 4-bed ward went to bed thinking he was getting an operation the next morning. Guaranteed that Sarah's dad and the 2 other men in the ward who watched the whole thing happen are going, I hate NHS waiting lists. Give me it now. And yet when it comes to our spiritual condition, we are so prone to say, maybe tomorrow. The guy thought he was getting the operation when he woke up in the morning. The 34-year-old mum didn't think she was going to die of cancer. The 12-year-old boy who got hit by a bin lorry in Cramond didn't think he wasn't going to get to school. If you know your need now, confess Christ now.